We heard from Wayne Swan. We also heard from Alan Bollard as well, the New Zealand Central Bank. Which of these economies are primed in better position at this point?
Morning, Susan. Well, I think the Australian economy is currently in a better position. New Zealand economy is coming more quickly off a low base, though. So we've experienced 0.8% growth in the first quarter of this year, probably a similar performance in the second quarter, while over the first half of this year, I think the Australian economy has probably stalled. Look, I think the big difference between the two countries is that house prices are now rising in New Zealand, and that has put consumers in a better mood, whereas in Australia, they're now experiencing the very start of a house price shakeout with prices there turning to negative territory, and that's affecting consumer spending.
Okay, well, what about the move today by New Zealand Central Bank to keep interest rates on hold? And no surprise there, but they've also signaled that they have no urgency to raise rates either.
Yeah, the central bank signalled that domestic conditions certainly warrant higher interest rates. I mean, we have to remember the official cash rate's at a record low of 2.5%. However, tactically now is simply not the right time to move with what's going on in Europe. And also, there is a fear that European banking woes could translate into higher funding costs for New Zealand banks, which would then translate into independent interest rate moves within New Zealand. In other words, the private banks might do the central bank's work for it and reduce the need for OCR hikes. Look, I think the central bank's just going to wait and see what happens in Europe before moving.
Right, but eventually you do expect the RBNZ to move, right? Possibly, say, in the next year or so?
Absolutely. So we think they'll be moving early next year, and they have signalled, and we agree with them, that there'll be a need to move interest rates quite rapidly once the hikes do begin. So it's a strategy of waiting to see what happens in Europe. Hopefully, if there's a resolution at some point in the future, they'll start to move at that time.
And quickly, for Australia, what about the RBA? They're questioning, of course, Glenn Stevens' pay, but what about the RBA in terms of raising interest rates? We're going to see the next hike.
No, look, we think that the next move is actually going to be down for the RBA. The mining boom is still on, but it's relatively jobless. Meanwhile, you've got a consumer that's really hurting in the capital cities in Australia. Eventually, that's going to take the pressure off inflation, not for a while yet, and you could actually see interest rate cuts.